The other team I want to look at is on the other end of the spectrum. And this is a fascinating one to kind of compare. So the Sacramento Kings are a train wreck. Like, they've been a joke. They're a punchline. All of these things are true. Like, I could bag on the Kings forever and ever and ever. And it sucks because their fan base is great. The Kings last season had the 5th highest win differential. They won 3.4 more games than they should have won. They should be worse this season based off of that. They shouldn't be as good. I've already bet the Kings over. I bet 5 units on it. I may add more. And it's not just because of the trend that says that these teams that overperform go over. It's that, Brandon, we talked about in the beginning, the motivation factor. Is there any team in the league with a higher motivational factor to try and go out and win every single night, from the top of the organization in ownership on down to ticket sales, than the Sacramento Kings next season?
Certainly. This is exactly, I mentioned earlier, you have to look at motivation here, and you have to say, like, what is this team trying to accomplish here? And things like, well, they're trying to build a winning culture, and they're trying to make a run at the play. Like, those sound like sound bites. Those are real things that you absolutely have to factor in if you're going to play a win total here, and if you're going to play a game on a random night in March or February. You have to factor that sort of stuff in, because we're betting on motivations here, and you have to kind of figure out what are the incentives and motivations. And certainly the Kings are a team, even as the season drags on, even as, okay, we got to the beginning of April and the Kings are 4 back in the play-in race. I don't feel great about your 5 units at that point, but if we're there, how are you playing the Kings night to night? Are the Kings going to pack it in and tank? They're probably not. They're probably not that team. I would want them to. Brandon, the analyst, would want the Kings to tank and lose all their games and get their better draft pick. They've made their bed. The season is gone. The actual Kings want to establish winning culture, and they want to get away from the tanking mentality, and they want to, teach De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, like, what does it mean to win together? And so you have to pay attention to that on these teams. And there's not a number for that necessarily. So that's a spot where you can't just look at the numbers here. For me, that's why I need my range of outcomes, because my motivation factor is kind of pointing toward which edge of the range I should be looking at.
There's like a good example of this to me was when I sat down and started to do win totals, and I was like, let's just look at the overall, like, let's go to dunksandthrees.com, which I like because it does schedule adjusted. Let's look at their offensive and defensive ratings and their net ratings, and then look at their records. And like, I thought this was fascinating. Okay, so the Kings were 25th in net rating, schedule adjusted, 6th worst team in the league. 23rd in offense, bottom 10 in offense, 27th in defense, bottom 4 in defense. Like, this team's wretched. Like, that's the profile of a horrible team. They won 30 games. They won 30 games versus an on the board mark of 32.5 on the win total. And a lot of this also factors into, like, I was listening to somebody, I'm not going to say who is taking the Kings under. And he was like, this is a joke of a franchise. They traded Tyrese Halliburton, a great young player, to try and win now. That's a losing organization. Okay. I don't agree with any of that analysis. None of that should factor into whether or not you think they can win 33 games.
Yeah. To play the middle here, let me just add, I do agree with that analysis. Yes! I don't think it matters to the win total at all here. Right. In fact, I think it goes the other way. I agree with the analysis on the trajectory. I think it was a terrible decision. I don't like what they're doing, but it's very clear by doing that they're trying to win, and you probably should factor that in to a win total here.
Like, they won 30 games. I needed them to win 3 more games after trading for Domantas, adding Keegan Murray, who I think is going to be a really good player. They kept Harrison Barnes. Like, all the things that I would do if I were them, trading off the old pieces to try and get young assets and try and get better long-term, they didn't do. They just want to make the playoffs. They just want to end the playoff drought.
They just want to make the play-in to start. They like to win a play-in game if they get there, but they'd really like to make the play-in.
And they can still not do that and still go over.
Right.
I don't want to take the Kings to make the playoffs. I don't want to bet the Kings to make the play-in tournament, even though that's top 10. I don't even want that. but at 32.5, which is the low mark in the market, I think there's value on the over.
So I think a major difference between us, and we're going to have to go to battle on some of these teams. A thing that you just said that it jars the inside of how I process this stuff is the idea that, well, they won 30 games last year. I just need 3 more wins than that. At the start of my process, I look at how many they win last year. But the further I go in my process, the more and more I'm trying to get away from ever caring a rip about that number 30 from last year, because it is not relevant really at all in the end to what I'm looking at. I care much more about the terrible offensive rating, the terrible defensive rating, and the players who constructed that. And can they play any defense? And I don't really care if they won 30 games last year when they should have won whatever. Like this, it's a new year. That all the schedule factors that you talk about, all the ups and downs during the year, all of that already played into the number 30. I don't want any part of that number 30 as a baseline to determine where I'm going this year. I'm going to start fresh, and starting fresh for this particular team, I feel like the offense should be better, should be much better than it was last year. I still have a lot of doubts on the defense, and starting fresh, I put them in a range kind of in the high 20s, low 30s. And then that makes me feel very tenuous about where your 5 units are at on this. Is 5 units about the highest end that you would play a win total or any bet really?
Yeah, that's gonna be the highest. I bet most of my bets are gonna be between 2.5 to 3 units.
And what about for a team like the Kings, for example? And we'll probably just have to come back to this later, but I talked about, like, for me, the determination of, okay, so you got what you had 33.5. That's the number.
32.5.
32.5. Okay. Yes. So okay, so I think that answers my question. For me, I would think, okay, well, if I really love the over here, then is that the right play? Or should I be playing Kings to make the play-in, or Kings to go over the seed, right, or Kings to make the playoffs? Right. You've got that clear buffer zone there where you can go over just trying to get there. It's like doggy paddling through the water and get to your 34, 35 and still fall short.
The Pelicans are a great counterpoint to this, which is the Pelicans. I do not think if you want to play them, you should play their win total. I think you should only play their division. I think that the division is the only bet you should make on the Pelicans. I do not like, I will probably lean over. I may bet a small amount on the over just because I cannot get to a calculus where they go under. Well, I can, but like there are so many ifs that are low probability for me that I'm like, yeah, there's probably some value on the over, but the value is so much greater on betting them to win the division. The value is so much greater on betting them to make the playoffs. Like, these alternative markets is very important in determining the factor. You can't take win totals and like we do this because we're trying to focus in on the win totals. But this is one of the things I think it's good that we're going to do these in division format so that we can actually break down, like, I don't want to bet the win total. I want to bet the division. That's where I want to, that's where I think the value is.